We're joined by Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher, who's been in the news lately. Bob is often in the news. I'm sure he's a bit unhappy by this time being in the news. How are you?
Good, but never unhappy. It actually you used to put me in the news once in a while, Joe.
I have for years. You
Thank you.
You fight crime, and I get the sense that members of the Ramsey County Board take issue with some of your positions. Is that accurate?
Well, the public is the driving force here. I mean, the homicide rate was at a record last year. Carjackings were at a record the year before. We have stabbings and shootings at our schools. I mean, it really is our job to respond to the public concerns regarding crime.
Right.
You know, we try to do that. We have several initiatives, but unfortunately, some elected officials still would prefer to defund law enforcement and not recognize the importance of it. And, you know, they're behind the times. They're 3 to 4 years back, and the public is responding with a demand that we do something to make them safer.
Explain the letter you wrote to the board for us.
Well, we've been asking for additional resources to fight crime for the past 3 years and been turned down every time. And not only that, our budget was cut. And unilaterally, they decided that we're going to cut $2 million from your budget. The theory was that, you know, everyone was suffering under COVID, and so they unilaterally cut us the same as others. But one of the cuts was a vacancy factor where they said every department has to have 4% of their personnel costs cut. But unfortunately for us, we can't leave positions vacant.
Right.
We have to fill them with overtime because we're a 24-hour operation, both in the jail and on the street, and that was a $1.2 million cut. So they put us at a big disadvantage. And at some point, and Joe, you know I've been at this. This has been my career since 1977.
Mm-hmm.
I can't just sit back and watch us have our hands tied when it comes to fighting crime.
I wonder if the Ramsey County Board cut 4%.
Well, they've added several administrators. If you look at the number of bodies they've added.
Love it.
Spread out. Huh? Yeah, there you go. They've in the county manager's office, which someday you and I will have a meeting and talk about the county manager's office expansion because it's just exploded over the last 2 years.
Where do they get the budget for it, Sheriff?
I don't know. I mean, they're in charge of all the shells over there, so it's a shell game, and they're able to, you know, take money from one and give it to their administration.
Well, because you neglected to include a few people in your letter, those people that got excluded, they're playing the race card, for God's sakes.
Well, and I'm glad you raised that issue. It wasn't actually the people that got excluded that were playing that card. What happened was there's 2 brand new commissioners. They just started in January, and I didn't think it was fair or kind for me to include them in my letter talking about the past 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
If I had included them, they would have said, "Well, I wasn't here. How can you really blame me?" And they would have been right. So I did not include the 2 brand new members, and I didn't include Rafael Ortega because Rafael has always dealt with us in a professional way and listens to our concerns, and he's been a supporter of law enforcement. The other 4 are the ones that have collectively cut our budget and really, set us up for failure in regards to the jail overcrowding as well, which we've brought that issue of jail overcrowding to them 5 times last year.
For a public safety standpoint, where does the city stand right now over the length of your career?
Yeah. Well, if you just look at the numbers, we're clearly on the homicide numbers. We're at the highest we've ever been. Now, having said that, we've curtailed the carjackings on this side of the river substantially. We've had a focused effort, with our CAT team, our carjacking team. So compared to Minneapolis, there really is no comparison. What happens is Minneapolis is down 300 officers desperately trying to catch up, and their crime rates are still high. Every week there's several carjackings in Minneapolis. Most of the offenders know that they're better off going over to Minneapolis than they are here. But that really isn't any solace for us St. Paulites because eventually the problems in Minneapolis will extend to the whole metro area, and they are. So here's the thing I know about crime, and I've been doing this for a while. The demographics in terms of the number of people in the most frequent age group to commit crime, really you're talking about 16 to 25. As baby boomers and go through these different phases, that drives the actual numbers of crime. But there's a variety of other factors that are troublesome. I mean, with poverty, lack of education are huge. School safety, the politics of school safety, and you know that I'm a big supporter of having school resource officers in the schools. I'm not saying we don't need more counselors. I'm not saying that we don't need more social workers and mental health therapists. We need it all. School ought to be the one place that we can assure some safety. And if you remember back a couple of years ago, Joe, the Highland Villager down in your neighborhood there wrote a story and surveyed all the principals and the students, and 94% of 11th grade students said they would prefer to have SROs, school resource officers, in the schools. And of course, there was a big meeting last night. You probably saw in the news.
I did.
People talking about that, and it isn't that we have to choose between one or the other. We should do everything that can help our kids feel comfortable in school.
Well, Harding sounds like it's run like a Salvadoran prison. It just sounds horrific, and a lot of that blame's got to go back to these kids are just getting lousy parenting.
Well,
you don't have to say that. I'll be glad to say it.
Well, no. Parenting is always an issue. It's an early issue. It's upstream, but nobody disputes that. Education and the ability to read affects a child's self-esteem and how they do in school. But I don't really think it is constructive to engage in the parent debate because we got what we got, and we should try to help the kids once they're in school in any way that we can. And, to be frank, there's things that we can do better throughout the educational system. But talk about Harding, the bathrooms should never be exclusionary zones where some kids aren't allowed in because they're controlled by others.
Yeah.
Hallways shouldn't be walked nonstop without kids going to school. Someone should enforce the fact you need to go to a class. So there's a variety of things that have been talked about. The teachers have alerted the administration to them, and I'm hoping we're going to see some improvement. Actually, the superintendent indicated last week they were going to make some changes there. But, this is a big job. This is a big job helping kids succeed, which should be all of our goals, helping kids succeed. And right now, in addition to what's happening in the schools, we have two groups of kids in St. Paul, two groups that have been shooting at each other since last October. And I won't mention them by name because they like hearing their group name.
All right.
But I have to tell you, they're 14 to 16, 17 years old. They are on social media daily threatening each other, showing guns, and every so often something happens. Antoine Watson was killed in an alley on the east side last October.
Right.
That suspect in that is in custody in the juvenile detention center. That has evolved into a series of other threats and shootings. You saw the ox cart that got the car drove through there. That was two cars shooting at each other. And,
right.
And the occupants of that car were friends of the deceased from Harding.
Right.
Sheriff.
Go ahead.
Excuse me for interrupting you, but when are they going to change that so that kid's in juvenile detention, 14 to 16? When are they going to lower this 18? These kids are growing up so early that a 14-year-old has a presence how to use a gun of it poorly or drive a car.
Yeah. Well, not sure what needs to change first. Clearly, a child can be certified at age 16 or less than that if the court can demonstrate a reason for that. But for me, that isn't the place to start. The place to start is holding kids accountable in some form of juvenile detention facility for 3 to 6 months, where they can get treatment for their addiction, for their mental health, for all the social issues that they have, get away from their other group. We need facilities that can hold kids for 3 to 6 months locally here, where we can service them with other people from the community. And the closing of Totem Town by the Ramsey County Board in 2019 hurt that effort. Now, we have a bill in front of the legislature. Actually, Pat Connolly's wife, you've probably heard of him, and I know your relatives had a terrible situation, Joe, too. Same thing. His wife was carjacked, and they almost took their small child with them. He's been the leader to help us get this bill to where it will probably be passed, where we have 5 to 7 secure houses.
Yep.
Kids can't get out of, and they can get long-term treatment for their issues. And we don't have the alternatives available since Boys Totem Town closed down to actually treat kids in a way to help them succeed. And that has to be one of our top priorities.
I agree, and I've talked to Conley about this, and Troy's on board, and you're on board. It sounds like this could happen.
I think it will. And, it's unfortunate that enough people have to be victims of a carjacking in order for it to happen. It would be nice if we could think a little further ahead on public policy regarding crime and get ahead of this in the future.
Go back to school resource officers for a moment. You have a very weak school board. They even have on board a member who tried to start her own race incident, Chantel something. You've just got some really bad people on the school board. They took the school resource officers out. Would a school resource officer have prevented what happened at Harding?
Yes. A school resource officer in that school would have been able to intervene and neutralize that fight before the knife was drawn. And it's just a very, very difficult situation for a staff member or a principal or a counselor, even an unarmed security guard, to confront a fight where there may be a weapon.
Right.
They shouldn't have to do that. And the officers are trained. They have body armor. They have they have a taser. They have mace. There's other things. Plus, the mere presence of an officer there would make it less likely that that fight would start. So, yes, I believe that the school resource officer was there instead of a staff member, Devin Scott would not be dead.
Well, the other thing, and I believe you were the one who said it, what we've learned is that one of the ways the St. Paul Public Schools is such a miserable failure is that they're taking troublesome kids and they're just moving them from school to school. And I think it was you who said cops would have known that young Devin just arrived at Harding. They would have known some background and they would have had their eyes out. Is that correct?
That's 100% true. School resource officers have access to the information that can help them. And, I worked with Devin for a year and a half trying to help him choose the right course.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no question. The other thing about school resource officers is they're mentors, they're role models. Many kids have come into law enforcement because they had a good relationship with the school resource officer.
Mm-hmm.
There's someone people can go to. I just think the sad part is, school board member Chantel Allen, who you're referring to, in her Facebook post, she concluded by saying SROs, school resource officers, are still killer cops.
Well, she's a miserable fool who shouldn't even have been elected.
Well, I've dealt with miserable elected officials before, and some would say maybe still am. However, they knew not to utter words like SROs are still killer cops.
Right.
Yeah. There should be a line there.
Yeah.
Sheriff, it's Kenny. I was referring to this piece that was in the St. Paul paper over the weekend. I was stunned to learn, and I think the figure was 30 to 40 or more students walking the halls during class. Would a school resource officer also bring that to an end?
Well, I think they could certainly help. That policy would still be set by the principal, and they could determine what their policy was going to be. I mean, I go back to the days that we had a truancy center, an alternative place that kids were taken to when they refused to go to class back in the late 90s. There are a lot of alternatives that are available to get kids out of the hall. It might just be tell them you have to leave. And by the way, your parents are going to be told, they're going to be a knock on the door from a truancy officer telling them that you refuse to go to class. So that could be monitored. The thing about that story, Josh Burgess did an amazing story. That might have been the finest piece of reporting that I've seen in 15 years.
I say it's the most important story that we've ever run.
I think it is, and you and I have been around for a while. I think that was an amazing story, and I got to give him credit. But the one of the parts of that story, besides all the teacher input, schools should be for the kids that want to learn, right? Mm-hmm. We can't let the 1% to 3% of the kids that don't want to learn stop the other ones from learning. Mm-hmm. And so once we get our mind wrapped around the small numbers, and Joe, let me just say that when I talk about kids that need to be held, I'm talking about a small number in Ramsey County. We're talking 30 to 50 kids. Mm-hmm. 30 to 50 kids out of literally thousands and thousands of children in Ramsey County. 30 to 50 that need accountability, but because the system does not hold them accountable, they continue to victimize and cause problems for the rest of us.
But to me, one of the most amazing aspects of that Harding story was the idea that teachers fear recrimination if they report problems. I don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah.
And but it's obviously felt by a lot of people. I don't know if you remember Roy Magnuson. Roy Magnuson was a teacher at Como.
Yeah.
And 15 years ago, he tried to alert the school district to this problem.
Right.
This growing problem of behavior. Really, it's a behavior issue of misbehavior and poor behavior and unwillingness to listen to principals and no structure in the schools to deal with misbehavior. And a lot of people that you weren't happy with them now are saying, you were right, Roy, we should have listened to you 15 years ago.
Well, it's happening again. They're not listening to the teachers at Harding. Let's just take Harding. They're not being listened to. And this was the end result, was a murder in your school.
Right. Well, and it won't be the last one unless they get serious. The things are escalating amongst these young kids and guns. And sadly, because there are enough out there carrying guns, now more are resorting to carrying guns and, of course, using their protection line as the reason they're carrying guns. But I'll tell you what, I will say this. I met Monday night and today again with Mickey Frost up at the Truth Center. Mm-hmm. And Mickey pulled together 50 leaders in the black community that are just ready to go out and work with these kids. And hopefully Mickey has gotten a contract now to go into school and be a de-escalator, a communicator, and working with these kids. And I got to tell you, that's our best hope. Our best hope is to have community leaders say, I want to go into the school and help neutralize these conflicts, talk to these kids, become a role model for them, take them to ball games, take them to do different activities. And, you know, if people really want to lick this problem, it's an hour and a half a week of volunteer time helping our children succeed.
Okay, you just brought up, Sheriff, you just brought up something I wanted to raise, but I was afraid to because I thought it came from a naive position. It seems to me what these kids lack is hope. And it seems that they're probably too cynical to get hope or inspiration from the people that are already there. And I'm thinking that program is exactly what these kids need. They need hope. They need to see that there is life beyond this and that they can make untold millions if they want, if they just ignore the criminal life. Am I being stupid, or is that true?
Nope. You're right. They need hope and an inspiration as a way. But I would say, I use the other word. They need something to aspire to achieve.
Right.
You know, they need exposure to role models and different jobs and stuff so that they can figure out that their aspirational endeavors can be achieved. And we need volunteers to help in that. And, you know, if people want to, you can get a hold of me on Facebook. Send a message via Facebook to my personal page or to the Live on Patrol page. And, you know, we're going to start collecting volunteers that can work with these kids, the most troubled kids.
I appreciate it, sir.
You know,
let's talk again.
There is hope.
All right.
How's Live on Patrol going?
Live on Patrol is going great. We got Under Sheriff Mike Martin on Mondays, the CAD team on Wednesdays, and yours truly and Pat on Friday nights.
All right.
And, of course, Nick at night, late at night.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you guys join us.
Stay away from my house. All you're going to do is bring trouble.
I never tell him your address.
He's over there on Main. He's up there on Main.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. We're joined by Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher, who's been in the news lately. Bob is often in the news. I'm sure he's a bit unhappy by this time being in the news. How are you?
Good, but never unhappy. It actually you used to put me in the news once in a while, Joe.
I have for years. Thank you. You fight crime, and I get the sense that members of the Ramsey County Board take issue with some of your positions. Is that accurate?
Well, the public is the driving force here. I mean, the homicide rate was at a record last year. Carjackings were at a record the year before. We have stabbings and shootings at our schools. I mean, it really is our job to respond to the public concerns regarding crime.
Right.
You know, we try to do that. We have several initiatives, but unfortunately, some elected officials still would prefer to defund law enforcement and not recognize the importance of it. And, you know, they're behind the times. They're 3 to 4 years back, and the public is responding with a demand that we do something to make them safer.
Explain the letter you wrote to the board for us.
Well, we've been asking for additional resources to fight crime for the past 3 years and been turned down every time. And not only that, our budget was cut, and unilaterally they decided that we're going to cut $2 million from your budget. The theory was that, you know, everyone was suffering under COVID, and so they unilaterally cut us the same as others. But one of the cuts was a vacancy factor where they said every department has to have 4% of their personnel costs cut. But unfortunately for us, we can't leave positions vacant.
Right.
We have to fill them with overtime because we're a 24-hour operation, both in the jail and on the street, and that was a $1.2 million cut. So they put us at a big disadvantage. And at some point, and Joe, you know I've been at this. This has been my career since